Our next speaker, Colleen Berryessa, studies how the psychological and social factors shape public attitudes to sentencing and punitive decision-making in the justice system. And she's going to discuss how scientific education can reduce support for retribution and promote more compassionate and evidence-based approaches. So we're really thrilled to have you with us too, Colleen. Welcome.
Thank you. And as all the other speakers have said, thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm happy to be here, and I'm very happy that you all decided to focus on this topic for the campfire this month. So I am as that was just mentioned, I study how social and psychological factors shape punishment attitudes. This is of both people who work in the legal system, so judges, expert witnesses, and other individuals who make decisions and handle defendants in the criminal court system, as well as public attitudes, which is really important for a variety of reasons I won't get into today. For both of those populations, science education is something that is more prominent, again, across specific types of individuals with different backgrounds, but especially people in the criminal justice system, it's lacking in training and background in that area. It continues to be lacking. So there, some of this has been covered and a lot of this is background, but there obviously has been a host of biological and behavioral science evidence in the last 30 to 40 years that have really challenged the notion of free will in the way that, philosophically we've talked about it. And this is, again, not just related to human behavior more generally, but also criminal behavior and how there might be factors that are influencing an individual's ability to either exercise or influence their own behavior in certain social situations, so conforming their behavior to the law. And so this could be related to mental illness. There's a host of wonderful research that's been done about biological influences to the development or higher likelihood for different types of mental illness. And again, this is so many different types of psychiatric diagnoses that can be talked about, some of which have been associated with increased types of offending. Different types of physical and functional irregularities. So this could be related to some of the work that's been done in biosocial criminology, which is related to how, certain features, especially in utero, that might change a person's development. And that has later been associated with a higher likelihood for offending behavior. There's also different types of personality characteristics we know that are genetically influenced or genetically predisposed. And then there are just generally life experiences that we all have from childhood up until adulthood that shape how we interact with the world and shape our biology and basically how we end up navigating and interacting in different types of social situations. This could be related to trauma experienced in childhood, but it's also just how we change throughout general life experiences, regardless if they're traumatic or not. So a lot of this research has really come into conversations that we've hinted at today that really have kind of described how neurobiology of will and behavior might start to at least have discussions and considerations about how we might want to change the criminal justice system, specifically how we respond to crime and how we respond to behavior that might be influenced by these biological influences. And this might be a shift away from retribution, the idea that a person is maybe morally blameworthy for their behavior and we want to punish them because we want them to suffer. If we know that their behavior is in some way influenced by these external factors, retribution becomes less potentially focused on as a goal, where it becomes, in a retributive sense, more about punishing the person for who they are, as compared to thinking about where that behavior may have stemmed or have been influenced, and how we might want to think about responding to their offenses and their behavior in more compassionate and consequential ways, thinking about using punishment or responses to crime to benefit the person and allow them to kind of move forward in such a way where they are at a higher likelihood of not offending in the future, and then also reforming their behavior. So there has been some research and a lot of discussion kind of across neurolaw about how exposure to science education and knowledge really can help to revise people's kind of, again, older understandings of free will and start to think about responsibility, especially moral responsibility, differently. And those kind of moral responsibility adjustments map onto these kind of reconsiderations of punishment and how and why and the goals of why we punish in the criminal justice system. Some of this might be through the media, there's formal education, which I'll talk about in a second. Workshops have been discussed about something that might be good for judges or people who work in the criminal justice system. And in fact, I did a study in 2019 that I'm not going to talk about today about judges and how they might have specific types of cognitive bias towards individuals with mental illness when thinking about their mental illness as being influenced by genetics, and how when they had a background in genetics or at least some sort of prior exposure, even if it was limited, that really mitigated those retributive or harsh feelings when thinking about sentencing individuals with these specific types of genetically attributed or influenced characteristics. But today, I'm just going to briefly talk about a study that I conducted with my amazing postdoctoral fellow who's now at the Dana Foundation, which is an amazing institute that everyone should look into if they're interested in this kind of neuroscience and society work, where we were really interested in trying to figure out how science education might reduce the odds of punitive sentencing or harsh sentencing. And so what we ended up doing, and the study is on the screen, there'll probably be a link that's going to provide a lot more information than I'm going to be able to do in a couple of minutes. But basically what we were interested in figuring out is, do people with scientific education opt for less punitive sentences, and does their understanding of free will and responsibility mediate this? And this was specifically around mental disorder cases or cases involving defendants with mental disorders and how they might be biologically attributed or influenced. And in kind of historically, mental disorders have been thought of as kind of this double-edged sword evidence, where sometimes people view them as being mitigating evidence, something that lessens punishment or lessens responsibility. And in other cases, it's thought of as aggravating evidence. It might breed views that a person is more dangerous because they have a mental disorder, especially if it's biologically influenced. So what we ended up doing is we did this survey with a sample of people who had graduated from college, and this was an international study. So it was people from across Europe and the United States. And we split these individuals into different categories based on what they had formally trained in their education in college. And so this was biological and behavioral sciences. So this was things ranging from biology to psychology, so behavioral and biological sciences. And then we created a separate category for people who had other types of harder sciences, potentially things like physics or other things that aren't specifically related to biology. And then that also included things like math, politics, art history, things like that. And so what we did is we presented them with little fictional cases, and we varied things up, and we basically were trying to figure out how they wanted to sentence this person. And in some of those cases, the biology of the person was known in different ways, and in other cases, it was not. And so what we ended up finding is that the science education did reduce the odds of punitive sentencing. And what we found is that the decisions that people made, the less punitive sentencing towards these individuals, was based on free will. And we found that specifically science graduates, again, really focused on free will and really thought about responsibility in a very different way. So ultimately, what I want to leave you with here, and it's kind of the focus of the paper that hopefully you'll read, is that free will does appear to be something that is being reconsidered by people with science education, and that potentially having education in this background can help us to reimagine free will and punishment in different ways. And I'm happy to answer questions after we finish the panel.